The first thing Rachel Monroe noticed was how quiet the park sounded when it was still dark. Not silent, never that. A city park always carried noise the way a river carried silt, the faint hiss of distant traffic, the occasional mechanical groan from a bus braking on a nearby avenue, the hard little clicks of sprinklers turning on and off. But this was a different kind of quiet, one that felt arranged, curated, the sort of hush that made every small sound seem deliberate. Rachel had been coming to Alder Ridge Park for months, drawn by its long loop path and the wide open fields that made her feel safer than sidewalks boxed in by buildings. It was early autumn now, the air beginning to taste like rust and cut grass. The day was still deciding whether to be cold. A thin, slate-colored mist hovered over the baseball diamond, blurring the chain-link fence until it looked like a shadow of itself. She parked under a lamp that flickered as if it was thinking about quitting. The light kept stuttering, turning her windshield into a strobe of pale rectangles. She got out, locked the car, and started the familiar warm-up walk toward the paved loop. What made Alder Ridge feel different from other parks wasn't the size, it wasn't even the layout. Fields, playground, picnic shelters, a dog run, and a wooded section that formed a natural border. It was the maintenance presence. Little green utility carts passed sometimes. Crew trucks appeared near the bathrooms. Freshly trimmed edges kept the place looking manicured, almost staged. Rachel used to find that comforting. That morning, the manicured feeling made her uneasy. A new sign had been posted near the main trailhead, strapped to a pole with bright metal bands. It was the kind of laminated notice that curled slightly at the corners, as if it had been printed in a hurry. She didn't stop long enough to read it fully, only registered the bold headings and the blocks of smaller text underneath. Something about updated hours, and something else about restricted areas. The path took her between tall maples, their leaves starting to turn like paper left too close to heat. As she walked, she tried to shake the stale anxiety she'd carried all week. Work had been heavy, sleep had been thin. She told herself the park was simple. The park was routine. The park was a loop you could measure in minutes. By the time she began her jog, the mist had thinned and the sky had lightened to the color of wet cement. Rachel settled into an easy pace. Her shoes made a soft, rhythmic tap against the pavement, and with each breath she tasted cold air and the faint bitterness of decaying leaves. She passed the playground first. Empty swings hung perfectly still. The rubberized ground held a few scattered leaves that looked like dropped, curled hands. The picnic shelters stood in rows, each with a concrete pad and wooden tables bolted down. Beyond them, the dog run waited behind its double gates, empty too. And then she saw movement. At first she thought it was an early dog walker cutting across the field, but the figure wasn't moving like a person out for leisure. The stride was purposeful, straight-lined, as if the grass were a hallway and the destination was fixed. A reflective vest caught the grey light and flashed a bright strip of neon. A maintenance worker. That was the assumption her mind offered. Neat and ready. But the figure didn't carry a rake, a bag, or anything that made sense. No tools, no cart. Just that vest and a dark cap that hid the face. The person moved toward the wooded border, away from the main path, heading for a section of fence that separated the park from a service road. Rachel kept jogging, but her pace slowed without her meaning to. The vest brightened again, and then the person disappeared behind a clump of shrubs. She told herself it was nothing. Parks had staff. Staff went places the public didn't. There were storage sheds, electrical boxes, irrigation controls. There were reasons. Still, her eyes kept drifting toward the tree line as she ran. The first lap went by smoothly. The second lap felt different, as if the park had shifted its weight. Rachel noticed small details she'd never given attention before. A trash can that had been turned slightly away from the path, the lid angled like someone had been looking into it. Fresh tire tracks in a patch of dirt near a maintenance gate. A length of bright orange rope tied around a low branch as a marker, the kind used to direct crews. She didn't remember Seingsley noticing that rope before. Halfway through her third lap, she caught another flash of reflective material ahead, deeper in the park. This time it was near the bathrooms, the low brick building with two entrances and the muted municipal smell that always leaked out when the doors opened. The reflective vest was visible only for a second between the trees. The person moved behind the restroom building into the narrow strip of land between brick and bushes where the public rarely walked. Rachel's legs kept moving, but her stomach tightened. Her brain began to stack observations into a pattern that it didn't want to name. She reached the section of path that ran closest to the bathrooms. A breeze nudged through the trees, carrying a sharp chemical odor. bleach or something stronger. Not the faint cleanliness of a recently mopped floor. This smelled industrial, clinging and raw. Rachel passed the restrooms without turning her head, but she watched in her peripheral vision. A side door was visible on the back of the building, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs. She had never noticed it before. It looked older than the rest of the building, a solid metal door with a narrow seam around the edges. A dull padlock hung from a hasp, except the padlock wasn't latched. It dangled open as if it had been unlocked and forgotten, or left that way on purpose. Rachel kept running. Her heart rate rose for reasons that had nothing to do with exertion. The loop curved away into a section where the trees thickened, and the park felt less like a designed space and more like a fragment of woods that had been trapped inside city limits. She reached the small footbridge that crossed a shallow drainage channel. Water slid below, thin and dark, catching faint reflections of the sky. On the far side of the bridge, the paved path split. One branch continued the official loop, while a narrower, unpaved trail cut into the woods. That dirt trail had always been there, but it had never seemed important. It wasn't on the park map near the entrance, it wasn't maintained. It was just a temptation. That morning, a new marker had been placed at its opening, a stake with a strip of reflective tape, the same kind of reflective tape that had flashed from the vest. Rachel slowed to a jog walk. She stared at the dirt path. It looked darker than usual, as if the trees had decided to lean together and make a tunnel. Leaves lay thick on the ground, matted down in places where something heavy had been dragged recently. She told herself to keep moving, keep running, finish the loop, go home. It was the smart option, and yet her feet stopped. The park felt staged again, but in a different way. Not manicured, managed. Like someone had been arranging sightlines, directing attention away from certain spots. The new sign at the entrance, the stake by the trail, the unlocked back door on the restroom building. Pieces that didn't match but belonged to the same puzzle. A faint sound reached her from the woods. Not a voice, not words. Something more mechanical. A dull, repetitive clank, like metal tapping metal in a steady rhythm. It made her think of a gate swinging, or a chain hitting a post. Rachel stood frozen long enough that the chill began to bite through her sweatshirt. Her breath fogged in front of her face. She looked back toward the paved loop. No one was visible. The park was empty in that way that felt impossible for a place meant for the public. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, a notification she didn't check. The vibration felt too loud. Rachel turned her head again toward the dirt trail. The clanking sound stopped. For a moment the woods became perfectly still, as if something had listened and decided to hide. Rachel forced herself to move again, stepping back onto the paved path. She resumed jogging, but it didn't feel like exercise anymore. It felt like retreat. Her eyes kept flicking to the sides, scanning. Every tree trunk looked like a person standing sideways. Every gap between branches looked like a place where someone could watch without being seen. As she rounded a curve, she saw the maintenance cart. It was parked off the path near a stand of trees half hidden, its green body blending with the shadows. The cart's key was still in the ignition. A small orange cone sat behind it, placed with careful intent. On the passenger seat lay a pair of work gloves, stiff and dark, as if they'd been worn with wet hands. Rachel slowed again, unable to help it. Maintenance carts weren't supposed to be abandoned like that, not in a public park during open hours, not with the key left behind. On the ground near the cart was a scuffed rectangle of dirt where something heavy had been set down. Beside it, pressed into the soil, was a deep groove, as if the edge of a metal object had been dragged. Her throat tightened. She told herself it could be anything. A generator, a toolbox, a bag of gravel, anything. Then she saw the scrap of fabric. It was caught on a thorny vine, low to the ground, a small piece of cloth that looked torn away. A pale color, maybe off-white. The edge was frayed and one side had a faint printed pattern, tiny stars or dots. It didn't look like something a maintenance worker would wear. It looked like something from a blanket or a shirt, the kind of fabric that didn't belong to any tool or piece of equipment. Rachel didn't touch it. She didn't step closer. She just stared until her eyes began to water from the cold. A shape moved behind the trees. The reflective vest flashed again, closed this time, no longer a distant figure crossing a field. It was behind the cart, just beyond the trunk of a large oak. The person's body was obscured, but the flash of neon made it clear someone was there, watching, waiting. Rachel's body reacted before her mind caught up. She turned and ran. Not a jog, not a controlled pace. A full sprint that made her lungs burn, and her footsteps slapped the pavement hard enough to echo. She didn't look back. She didn't want to see whether the vest was following. Her imagination offered too many options, and every one of them felt worse than the last. She ran toward the main entrance, toward the brighter part of the park, toward the open fields where she believed visibility meant safety. The path seemed longer than it had minutes earlier. Curves stretched. Trees thickened. The park stopped feeling like a loop and started feeling like a maze designed by someone who knew how people fled. When she finally broke out near the playground, the sky had brightened more, but the park still held that arranged quiet. Rachel slowed only when she reached the parking lot. Her car waited under the flickering lamp, and the sight of it felt like a lifeline. She fumbled her keys, hands unsteady, and unlocked the door. As she slid into the driver's seat, she locked the doors immediately, her fingers moving too fast as if the motion itself could build a wall. She sat there, breathing hard, staring through the windshield at the empty trailhead. Only then did she notice the new sign again, the laminated notice with bold headings. From inside the car, she could see enough to register a phrase near the top. Not the full paragraph, not the details, just a few words in larger text. Restricted access, service areas, authorized personnel only. Rachel's breathing slowed. Her pulse kept pounding in her ears. She stared at the sign until the letters stopped swimming. Then her eyes drifted to something else. A second sign, smaller, pinned underneath the first. It looked like a community posting, the kind of paper that got stapled up near bulletin boards. The ink was darker, the layout more personal. A photo was attached. Small, slightly blurry, printed on cheap paper. A missing person notice. Rachel couldn't see the face clearly from where she sat, but she saw the shape of it. A headshot, a name underneath, a date. The kind of paper that always looked too fragile for what it represented. Her stomach dropped, because Rachel realized she had never seen missing person notices posted in this park before. Not once. Not in months of running the loop. And yet this one looked like it had been stapled up recently. Crisp corners, clean paper, no sun fade, as if someone had decided it was finally time for people to notice. Rachel kept her hands on the steering wheel for a long moment, staring at the entrance, the path, the sign, the empty stretch of park that had seemed so ordinary. A flicker of neon moved far back near the tree line, almost too subtle to be real. A reflective vest catching light. Rachel didn't wait to confirm it. She started the car and pulled out, leaving the park behind with the uneasy certainty that what she'd seen wasn't an accident of timing, and that the back side of the park, where the dirt trail began and the maintenance door hung unlocked, was a place she had been allowed to ignore for too long. And what waited beyond that door was still there, because no sirens came, and no one else in the parking lot seemed to notice anything wrong at all. Rachel didn't drive straight home. She told herself she would, but her hands kept adjusting the wheel as if her body didn't believe the decision. She took the long route that looped around the park's perimeter streets, passing the outer fence line where the trees grew close and the ground dipped into brush-filled gullies. She was looking for something specific without admitting it, an open gate, a service entrance, a place where a person in a reflective vest could step out without being seen. Alder Ridge Park had always presented a clean face. Trailhead signs, posted rules, neat fields. From the roadside it looked different, less like a recreational space and more like a bordered property with discrete access points. Twice she saw authorized vehicles only signs posted on narrow paved cut-throughs that she'd never noticed before. One was blocked by a chain. The other had a swing gate that looked newly repaired, its metal brighter than the rest. She kept going until she reached a spot where the tree line thinned, and the fence turned into a tall wooden privacy wall. It ran behind a row of modest houses, the kind with aging decks and backyard trampolines. Between two lots she saw a break in the wall, an inset gate flush with the boards, painted the same dull brown so it blended in. A padlock hung there, but unlike the restroom door, this one was closed. Rachel pulled over anyway, parked, and sat with her engine off. She watched the gate for several minutes, waiting for movement that never came. The neighborhood itself looked asleep. No dog barked, no porch light turned on. She could hear the faintest hum of electrical lines. Her phone showed no missed calls, no emergency alerts, no sirens on any nearby street. The world was behaving as if she had imagined everything, but she hadn't imagined the missing person notice. Back at her apartment, she tried to do normal things. She showered. She poured coffee that she didn't drink. She stared at her shoes by the door as if the rubber soles might carry mud from a place that could explain what she'd seen. She opened her laptop and searched the park's name, then the city's parks department page. Most of it was bland: field reservation, hours, rules about dogs and grills. She found a small announcement dated the previous week: maintenance upgrades in progress. Some areas temporarily restricted. It didn't mention tunnels, doors, or anything unusual. Then she searched missing person reports and scrolled until her eyes felt raw. A local community board had reposted a flyer. The same face from the park sign, clearer now. An adult woman, mid-30s, photographed against a plain wall. The caption asked for tips, noted she'd last been seen near Alder Ridge Park early morning hours, and included a date that made Rachel's throat tighten. It wasn't months ago, it was 12 days ago. Rachel stared at the photo so long she started noticing details that felt too intimate. How the woman's smile didn't reach her eyes, how her hair was tucked behind one ear, as if she'd been interrupted mid-motion. The comment section beneath the repost was a mess of rumors, sightings, arguments, accusations. One person claimed the park had service tunnels that went back to an old water facility. Another person insisted it was impossible, that the park was built long after any of that infrastructure. A third person replied with a grainy image. Someone had snapped a picture of a metal door at the back of the restroom building. Rachel recognized it instantly, the very door with the unlatched padlock. Her chest tightened again, but now it wasn't only fear. It was a hard, grinding pressure, the feeling of having stood near something dangerous while everyone else kept walking past it. She didn't want to go back. The thought made her skin prickle, but by late afternoon the need to replace uncertainty with something solid pushed her out the door again. She told herself she'd only drive by, only look, only confirm the door existed and that the padlock still hung open. The park looked busier in daylight. Families arrived with strollers. Teenagers cut across the field with backpacks. A pair of older men walked the loop, arms swinging in slow rhythm. The normal activity made Rachel feel both safer and more uneasy, like she was watching people stroll through a scene where the floorboards were rotting under the rug. She parked where she had that morning. The flickering lamp was steady now, as if it had composed itself. She walked instead of ran, moving with the careful pace of someone trying not to look suspicious, trying not to look like she had a reason to be there beyond fresh air. At the trailhead, the missing person notice was gone. Only the laminated park announcement remained. Rachel stopped and stared at the blank space where the smaller flyer had been pinned. The staple holes still peppered the pole, tiny and ragged, like the paper had been torn off in a hurry rather than removed neatly. She moved toward the restrooms, keeping her gaze down, blending with the flow of park-goers. The chemical smell wasn't as strong now. The air carried sunscreen, cut grass, and the faint sweetness of spilled soda. When she reached the bathrooms, she waited until no one was near, then angled around the building along the narrow strip behind it. The shrubs scratched at her legs. The ground was uneven and damp in places where sunlight didn't reach. The metal service door was still there, but the padlock was no longer dangling open. It was latched and tight, the metal gleaming as if it had been recently handled. Fresh scuffs marked the door's surface near the lock plate, thin arcs like someone had dragged a tool across it. Rachel leaned closer without touching it. The seam around the door looked darker than before, and she realized why. A line of gritty residue had collected there, like powdered concrete. Her mind supplied an image she didn't want. A heavy object repeatedly striking the frame, leaving dust behind. A faint vibration ran through the door. Not a sound exactly, more like a low tremor that made the metal feel alive, like something inside was running. An exhaust fan, a pump, a generator. Rachel backed away, and her shoe heel pressed into something soft. She looked down. In the dirt, near the shrubs, was a strip of neon fabric, small, ripped, as if torn from a reflective vest. It was half buried, dulled by soil. A few reflective threads still caught light when she shifted her foot. Her pulse jumped. She scanned around quickly. People walked by on the path. Children ran in short bursts near the playground. No one looked behind the building. No one had any reason to. Rachel left the strip of fabric where it was. She returned to the front of the restroom building and kept walking, trying to move like a person without a secret. Near the picnic shelters, she saw a green utility cart driving slowly along the service lane. 2 workers sat in it, both wearing reflective vests, both with neutral posture, both looking straight ahead. Rachel watched them pass, trying to read their faces, but the distance and the caps made it impossible. As the cart rolled by, she noticed something that made her throat tighten again. The cart's passenger had mud on his boots. Thick, dark mud, not the dry soil you got from grass. but wet earth that came from deeper ground, the kind that clung in heavy layers. It was the wrong color for the park's surface. The cart turned toward the wooded section, toward the place where the unpaved trail began. Rachel didn't follow. She didn't call out. She didn't do anything that would attach her to what she'd noticed. Instead, she walked back to the parking lot, sat in her car, and stared at her hands until her fingers stopped trembling. She drove to the nearest police substation and sat in the lot for 10 minutes before she could make herself move. She went inside, gave a statement in clipped, careful pieces, an open padlock, a maintenance cart left with the key, a missing person flyer removed, a service door that vibrated. When she left, the sky was beginning to pale toward evening. She didn't know what the officer believed. She didn't know what would be done with her report. 2 days passed. On the third day, she returned to Alder Ridge Park, not because she wanted to, but because the compulsion to check had become its own kind of sickness. Yellow tape blocked access to the restroom building. 2 patrol cars were parked near the service lane. A white utility van sat behind them. A small group of city workers in reflective vests stood near the back shrubs, their shoulders close, their bodies arranged as a barrier. Rachel parked far away and watched from her car. A metal door behind the building stood open for a brief moment, just wide enough to show darkness beyond the threshold. A narrow set of steps descended into that darkness. A gust of air pushed out, carrying a smell she could detect even through a closed car window. Stale dampness, old concrete, something metallic and sour. A worker swung the door shut again quickly. Rachel saw one more detail before the door closed. A strip of reflective tape on the inside wall, placed as if to guide someone down. She didn't wait. She drove away, and the next time she searched the missing person repost, she found it had been deleted. In its place, local news updates mentioned ongoing investigation and restricted access at the park, with no details. The park stayed open, the loop path stayed busy, and the new laminated sign at the entrance remained, its wording unchanged, as if it had always been there. Nathan Carlisle had a habit of walking city parks at night. For the same reason, some people watch storms from their porch. The world looked more honest when it wasn't performing. During the day, parks were loud with intention. Families picnicking, joggers tracking mileage, teenagers posing for photos, workers trimming edges, so everything looked safe. At night, the park belonged to its original shape. Trees became silhouettes. Paths became corridors. The artificial lights didn't illuminate so much as they selected what could be seen. Nathan wasn't reckless. He stayed on lit routes. He carried a small flashlight, mostly for uneven pavement. He kept his phone charged. He told himself these walks were simply a way to decompress after late shifts. Hawthorne Green was his regular place, an older park ringed by historic buildings, with a large pond in the center and a paved circuit that curved around it. The pond had a fountain in summer and thin ice at the edges in winter. The benches were bolted to concrete pads and spaced evenly, predictable, the way municipal planners liked things. That predictability was why Nathan noticed the new bench immediately. It wasn't there the previous night, he was sure of it. The bench sat on the pond side of the path, angled slightly toward the water, as if it had been positioned for a view. The metal slats were dark, almost black, and the armrests were smooth, lacking the usual city engraving. No plaque, no donor name, no department sticker. Even from a distance it looked wrong, too clean, too intact, like it belonged to a showroom more than a public park. Nathan slowed as he approached. The closest street lamp cast a circle of pale light that didn't quite reach the bench, leaving its edges in shadow. The pond behind it reflected the night in broken pieces. The fountain was off for the season, so the water sat still, making the place feel even quieter. Nathan told himself it was nothing. Parks replaced benches. Sometimes crews worked overnight, but he couldn't remember a single time the city installed something without leaving at least one marking. Even trash cans had labels. As he passed, he noticed something else. The bench wasn't bolted down. The concrete pad beneath it was bare and unscarred. The bench rested on the surface, as if it had simply been set there. Nathan could see the faint outline of its feet, where metal touched stone. A loose bench in a public park made no sense. It would be stolen, tipped over, dragged into the pond. His flashlight beam flicked over it as he walked, and for a split second the light caught something pale on the underside, something stuck to the back crossbar. Nathan angled the beam more deliberately, and his breath stalled. A strip of white tape. Not new, not clean, Old tape, wrinkled and yellowing at the edges like something that had been pressed onto metal and left for a long time. Nathan didn't touch it. He kept walking, but the bench stayed in his peripheral vision, a dark shape sitting too still. He completed the loop around the pond and came back to it from the other side. This time he slowed again, more deliberately, letting his flashlight roam over the ground. There were no tire tracks, no scrape marks, no footprints in the grass beside the path that suggested heavy lifting. The bench had arrived without leaving evidence of arrival. Nathan stood on the path, light aimed low. He didn't like how the bench felt like a prop placed for him, and that discomfort tightened in his chest the longer he stared. Then the pond surface shifted, not a ripple from wind, a smooth disturbance, like something large moved just under the water and displaced it without breaking the surface. The reflection warped and reformed. Nathan's grip tightened on the flashlight. He looked across the pond. The far bank was lined with trees and dim lamps. No one stood there. No movement, no jogger, no late-night fisherman. Nothing that would explain the disturbance. Nathan forced himself to keep moving. He walked another quarter loop and tried to focus on the normal details: lamp posts, trash cans, the distant hum of cars. But the sense of being watched began to spread, not as a dramatic certainty, but as a slow accumulation of small pressures. The way the hair at the back of his neck rose for no clear reason. The way his steps sounded louder than they should have. When he returned to the bench again, it looked different, not moved, not rotated, occupied. A dark shape sat on it, hunched forward, elbows on knees, head angled down. The figure blended with the bench's black slats, making it hard to separate person from object. Nathan's flashlight beam hit the ground near the feet, and he saw pale shoes. Nathan stopped short. The figure didn't move. No shift of posture, no turn of a head, no glance. Just stillness, like a mannequin dressed in street clothes. Nathan's pulse thudded in his ears. He told himself it was a tired person, someone resting, someone staring at the pond. But the posture was too rigid, too held. His flashlight beam crept up despite himself, and the light touched the figure's hands. The hands were covered, not by gloves, but by something wrapped. White tape, layered thickly around fingers and palms, uneven and wrinkled. The tape looked old, the same yellowing at the edges Nathan had seen under the bench. Nathan's breath caught, and the figure's head lifted slightly, not enough to show a face, only enough to suggest awareness. Nathan backed away one step, then another, his shoes whispering on the pavement. He kept the light low, as if raising it would be an invitation. He didn't turn his back, but he started moving sideways along the path, increasing distance without making it obvious. The figure's shoulders shifted. The bench creaked softly, an old sound, the kind of metal made when weight changed. Nathan kept moving, and when he reached the next pool of lamplight, he finally turned and walked faster, letting the darkness swallow the bench behind him. He didn't run. Running would make it real. But as he rounded the curve where the path angled away from the pond, he heard something behind him, a slow scrape on concrete, like metal feet dragging, like a bench being moved. Nathan kept his pace steady, even as the scrape followed him. It wasn't constant. It came in short, careful drags, like whoever or whatever was moving something heavy understood the value of patience. The sound would pause for a breath, then return, a low metallic rasp that traveled along the curve of the path. Nathan didn't turn around again. He had already seen enough: the taped hands, the rigid posture, the stillness that didn't match any normal exhaustion. If he looked back and saw the figure close, too close, there would be no room left for denial, no thin membrane of possibility to hide behind. He reached a brighter patch where two lampposts overlapped, creating a wider pool of light. The grass looked artificially green beneath it, as if painted. The pond was just out of view now, blocked by shrubs and a cluster of decorative trees. The city's distant hum thickened here. A road ran behind the park's old stone wall, and the occasional car passed like a slow, unseen wave. Nathan's phone sat heavy in his pocket, but pulling it out felt like an invitation to lose precious seconds. He held the flashlight low and kept walking. His breathing had changed, shorter, shallower. His body was preparing to run even while his mind kept insisting on caution. The scrape returned, longer this time, and with it came another sound, a bench's faint creak as if metal slats were flexing under shifting weight. Nathan's shoulders tightened so hard they ached. He reached the next curve, where the path narrowed between two stretches of hedges. The hedge line rose taller than his chest, neatly trimmed during the day, but now forming a corridor. Ahead the path bent again, and he knew what waited beyond it. the park's north gate, where the iron arch opened toward a street with storefront lights and late-night traffic. That gate was his boundary. Past it, the park ended. Past it, the world had witnesses. The scrape stopped. That sudden silence hit harder than the noise. Nathan's steps faltered, and he almost tripped. A cold sensation crawled up the back of his neck, the feeling that the thing behind him had stopped moving because it didn't need to. He forced himself forward again, refusing the impulse to sprint. The hedges pressed close, trapping the lamplight into narrow bands. His flashlight beam trembled across the pavement. Halfway down the hedge corridor, a new sound emerged, the softest shuffle on leaves, not on the pavement behind him, but off to his left, inside the hedge line where there shouldn't have been a path. It wasn't the heavy scrape of metal. It was lighter, quicker, like someone moving parallel, using the hedge as cover. Nathan's stomach turned. He quickened his walk without fully running. His shoes made sharper, louder impacts. His flashlight beam jumped, catching a few pale leaf undersides, then the black mouth of a drainage grate embedded in the curb. Something brushed the hedge from the inside. A ripple traveled along the glossy leaves, moving toward him. Not a wind gust. Too localized, too deliberate. Nathan's body surged into a run then, decision stripped down to survival. He reached the end of the hedge corridor and burst into the open curve that led straight to the north gate. The iron arch was visible ahead, backlit by streetlights beyond. He ran hard, lungs burning, the flashlight now useless in the broad wash of light. Behind him, the scrape returned again, louder and faster, no longer careful. Nathan glanced back despite himself. The bench was moving. It slid along the pavement in short jerks, its feet grinding and chattering against the path. The dark figure was still on it, still hunched, still taped, yet the bench advanced in a way that made no sense if a single person was pushing it from behind. The bench didn't wobble like something shoved by brute force. It traveled with an eerie steadiness, as if guided from beneath or pulled by something low and unseen. For a split second, Nathan's flashlight beam, still in his hand, caught the underside. He saw shapes down there that weren't bench supports. A low, dark form close to the ground, pressed against the concrete. An outline like shoulders, like a back, like someone crawling. The beam flicked away immediately as Nathan's arm swung with his run, but the image stayed in his mind with brutal clarity. The bench wasn't moving on its own. Something was moving it while staying hidden behind it, under it, inside the angle of shadow the bench created. Nathan hit the north gate at a sprint and stumbled onto the sidewalk outside the park. The change in environment was immediate. Car headlights, storefront reflections, a delivery truck rumbling past. The normal noise hit him like a wall. He turned and backed away from the gate, keeping it in view. Inside the park, the bench had stopped at the edge of the lamplight just short of the archway. It didn't cross over. It sat there, perfectly placed in shadow, as if obeying an invisible line. Nathan stood on the sidewalk, chest heaving, staring at it. The figure on the bench slowly raised its head higher than before. The light caught the lower part of the face, not enough for identity, but enough to show skin that looked pale and strained. The tape around the hands was layered thick, looping up the wrists. One strip hung loose, fluttering slightly. Then from behind the bench a second shape rose, not fully upright, just enough for Nathan to see a head and shoulders appear in the bench's shadow, like an animal lifting to look over a barrier. The face stayed out of the light, but the posture was unmistakably aware, calculating. Nathan stepped farther back, into the brighter sidewalk, closer to the nearest storefront. He kept his phone in his hand now. His thumb hovered over the emergency call screen, but his brain locked on the scene in front of him. The second shape lowered again, disappearing behind the bench. The bench shifted, just slightly, as if someone had adjusted grip. Then it moved away from the gate, retreating into the park's darker curve, the scrape softening as distance swallowed it. Within seconds, the bench blended into the black line of hedges, and the only proof it had ever been there was the fading rasp of metal on concrete. Nathan didn't re-enter Hawthorne Green that night. He stayed on the sidewalk until his breathing settled, then walked to a 24-hour diner a few blocks away, choosing the most brightly lit route, staying near windows and traffic. His hands kept shaking in small aftershocks, the kind that made it hard to hold a coffee cup steady. The next morning he returned to the park in daylight. Hawthorne Green looked harmless again. The pond glittered under sun. The fountain's basin sat empty and clean. Joggers moved in neat loops. A groundskeeper pushed a cart near the flower beds. Nathan walked the circuit with his eyes scanning for the bench. It wasn't there. Not on the pond side, not near the lampposts, not tucked under trees. The concrete pad where it had rested looked like every other section of walkway. No bolt holes, no fresh scuffs, no marks of heavy movement. Nathan checked the city's parks listing online later. No mention of bench replacement, no maintenance notice, nothing. That should have been the end. But 3 nights later, a local community update appeared, an alert shared through neighborhood groups, then reposted by others. Unidentified individual approached near Hawthorne Green. Possible attempted abduction. Avoid park after dark. The details were vague, but one line snagged Nathan's attention, hard enough to make his stomach tighten. The person who posted described a bench that didn't belong, a new bench that appeared near the pond and then vanished. Nathan read that line 3 times. He kept searching and found older posts scattered over the last 2 months, each describing something similar. A new bench in an odd location, late-night sightings, a figure sitting too still, people feeling watched. None of the posts had photos. None of them had follow-up. The next afternoon, Nathan went to the edge of the pond, where the path narrowed and the hedges began. He stared into the water. Sunlight made the surface bright and unreadable, but the pond had darker pockets near the retaining stones, where weeds grew thick. He saw something submerged near the bank. At first, it looked like a shadow, a long, dark rectangle. But as he walked along the edge, the angle changed and the shape sharpened. A straight line, a corner, the suggestion of metal slats beneath the surface, half hidden by green algae. Nathan didn't wade in. He didn't reach for it. He simply stood and watched until a couple walked by and glanced at him with polite curiosity. The moment he had an audience, he stepped back, as if he'd been looking at the water for ordinary reasons. Later that day, he called in a tip. 2 days afterward, Hawthorne Green's pond was partially cordoned off. A small crew in waders worked near the bank. A police cruiser sat near the south entrance with its lights off, looking casual, but positioned with intent. Nathan watched from a distance, staying on the sidewalk outside the park. He saw them pull something out of the water with straps and slow effort. It was a bench, not city-issued, no engraved department mark, no plaque, dark slats, smooth armrests. When they lifted it higher, water poured from places a bench shouldn't hold water, from inside seams, from hollow sections that had been cut and re-welded. A detective leaned close, pointing at the underside. A gloved hand tugged at a panel, and the panel shifted in a way that confirmed what Nathan's mind had refused to believe at the gate. The bench had been modified, not just placed, built for something. Nathan couldn't see exactly what they removed from it, but he saw the evidence bags afterward. Thin plastic with pale rolled strips inside, tape, layered and aged. He saw a second bag with dark items that could have been gloves or a cap or something else meant to erase identity. The park stayed open. People kept jogging. The daytime world remained intact, but the pond bench never reappeared. And weeks later, when Nathan passed the iron arch at night from the street outside, he sometimes thought he could hear a faint scrape deep inside Hawthorne Green, soft and patient, like metal feet learning the map of the darkness again. Mia Prescott chose public parks because she believed crowds made people safe. The logic was simple. Cameras, families, noise, movement. Places where a person could vanish were usually secluded. Places where a person could be seen were supposed to be different. That belief had guided her routines for years. Lunch breaks spent walking the city's botanical park, weekend loops around the duck pond, evening strolls through landscaped plazas where local bands played under pavilion lights. Riverside Commons was her favorite. It was huge, sprawling, designed to feel like a piece of wilderness grafted into the city. It had playgrounds, picnic lawns, tennis courts, a long boardwalk over wetlands, and an old ranger station near the eastern entrance that had been there since the park opened decades ago. The ranger station was more symbolic than functional. A small building of weathered cedar with 2 windows, a pitched roof, and a porch that sagged slightly at the corners. During daytime events, volunteers sometimes staffed a folding table out front and handed out maps. Most days it sat quiet, a relic that made the park feel official. Mia had walked past it 100 times without thinking. Until the afternoon, she noticed the lights. It was a bright Saturday in late spring, the kind of day that packed the park to its edges. Picnic blankets spread across the grass like patchwork, strollers clustered near the playground, cyclists glided through like silent fish. Mia had come to meet a friend later, but she arrived early to get steps in, taking the boardwalk route first and then cutting back through the main lawn. As she approached the ranger station, sunlight flashed on the window glass. That should have been all, but behind the glass she saw a pale, steady glow. The station lights were on. It was strange because the station looked closed. The porch had no table set up, no staff, no open door. The signboard by the path still carried last month's faded flyer about volunteer cleanup dates. Mia slowed and glanced around. People moved everywhere, laughing, carrying coolers, chasing dogs. No one seemed to notice the station at all. The glow inside wasn't the warm yellow of a lamp. It was colder, almost bluish, and it pulsed faintly, like a screen. Mia walked closer, her curiosity tugging her off the path by a few steps. The porch boards creaked under her weight. A thin layer of pollen dusted the railing. The door was shut, but not latched fully. She could see a narrow line of darkness along the frame, as if it hadn't been pulled tight. A small sign hung on the door handle. Not a city sign, not the usual printed notice on laminated paper. This was handwritten on plain white cardstock, the marker strokes thick and blunt. The message was short, and it made her pause long enough for an uncomfortable chill to run along her arms. Maps inside. Mia stared at it. Parks did offer maps sometimes, but the presentation was wrong. Too informal, too abrupt, like bait that assumed people would comply. She reached for her phone, meaning to take a quick photo and send it to her friend as a joke. But as she raised the camera, the glow inside the station dimmed slightly, then brightened again, an automatic adjustment, like a screen reacting to movement outside. Mia lowered the phone without taking the picture. She stepped off the porch and continued walking, telling herself it was nothing. Maybe volunteers had left a tablet running. Maybe an event was scheduled and someone was late. She finished a loop around the central lawn, passing the food trucks parked near the west entrance, then angled back toward the eastern side to meet her friend, near the wetlands boardwalk. When she passed the ranger station again 20 minutes later, the glow was stronger. The windows looked brighter, almost glaring, as if something inside had been turned toward the glass intentionally. And now, the door stood open a few inches. Mia stopped on the path, eyes fixed on that narrow gap. The inside of the station remained mostly hidden, but the bluish light spilled out onto the porch boards in a thin strip. No one went in. People streamed past it like water around a rock. A man pushing a stroller skirted the porch without looking. Two teenagers ran by, focused on their phones. A woman carrying a picnic basket glanced at the building, then quickened her pace. Mia realized she was holding her breath. She forced herself to inhale and started walking again, but slower now, drawn closer by the same reflex that made people slow down for roadside accidents. Her brain wanted a clear answer, something harmless to replace the creeping discomfort. As she neared the porch, she saw another handwritten sign taped inside the window facing outward. This one hadn't been there before. The letters were larger, cramped into the glass like whoever wrote them had run out of space and patience. It read, "Come in if you're lost." Mia wasn't lost, but as she read it, her phone buzzed in her hand. A message from her friend, time-stamped only seconds earlier. Her friend was running late and asked Mia to wait near the boardwalk entrance. Mia looked up toward the boardwalk and saw the small crowd gathering near the wetlands railing, people leaning to watch turtles sunning on logs. It felt safer over there, open and busy. She turned away from the station and started walking. Behind her, something changed. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift in the air. She felt it the way a person feels someone step too close behind them without hearing footsteps. Mia didn't turn immediately. She kept walking, forcing herself not to react. Then she saw it. Her shadow on the path stretched forward by the afternoon sun. Another shadow had joined it on her left, taller, closer than anyone walking near her should have been. Mia's pulse jumped. She glanced sideways. A person stood at the edge of the path near the ranger station porch, so close to her that if she had reached out she could have touched their sleeve. The person wore a neutral-colored cap and an oversized jacket, even though the day was warm. Their face was turned slightly downward, hidden by the brim. What caught Mia's attention wasn't the clothing. It was the lanyard hanging from their neck, a plastic badge holder, blank from this angle, swinging gently. The kind of thing staff wore, the kind of thing people trusted without thinking. The person angled their body toward the open station door, as if offering direction without using words. Their posture suggested urgency and familiarity, like they belonged there, and she didn't. Mia kept walking. The person stayed parallel for 2 steps, matching her pace without crossing in front of her. The shadow remained attached to hers, too close. Mia's grip tightened on her phone. She didn't call out. She didn't stop. She just increased her pace toward the wetlands boardwalk, toward the crowd, toward the open area where she could blend in. The person's shadow fell away. When Mia reached the boardwalk entrance, she turned her head slightly and looked back. The person was gone. The ranger station door was now open wider, and the bluish light inside flashed once, brighter than before, like a screen changing images. For a second, Mia saw something inside the station that made her stomach drop. A tripod silhouette, tall and angled, as if a camera had been set up facing the door. Then the door swung inward on its own, slowly, until the gap narrowed again, and the light became only a thin stripe. Mia stood at the boardwalk entrance with people pressing in around her, all of them focused on turtles and water and sunlight, and she felt as if she had walked past the edge of something designed to pull a person out of the crowd without anyone noticing. Mia stayed at the boardwalk entrance longer than she intended, letting the crowd's normal behavior reassert itself like a pressure bandage. People leaned over the railing to point at turtles and minnows. A cyclist dismounted to thread through pedestrians. Someone shook crumbs from a paper bag and drew a cluster of birds that hopped and flared their wings in greedy bursts. Nothing about the scene suggested danger, and yet the ranger station behind her kept tugging at the edge of her attention, as if the building had reached out an invisible line and wrapped it around her wrist. Mia checked her phone again, not to reply. Her hands didn't want to do anything that would slow her down, but to anchor herself to something practical. The message from her friend was still there, recent, ordinary. She lifted her gaze and scanned the faces near the boardwalk, looking for someone she recognized. Bethany arrived 10 minutes later, walking fast, hair pulled back, sunglasses pushed up on her head. Mia felt a sharp relief at the simple fact of a familiar person in a familiar place. The tightness in her chest loosened, though it didn't fully disappear. They moved along the boardwalk with the crowd, keeping to the center where the railing felt like a boundary and not a trap. Mia didn't point back toward the ranger station. She didn't want to turn it into a shared problem, while it still had the option of being nothing. But her eyes kept flicking toward the trees beyond the wetlands, toward the place where the ranger station's roofline peeked over leaves when the boardwalk curved just right. The rest of the afternoon went on as planned. They walked. They looped through the main lawn. They stopped near the food trucks. They watched a pickup game on the tennis courts. Sunlight shifted gradually from bright to honeyed as the day angled toward evening. And still, each time Mia's path brought her anywhere near the eastern entrance, she felt a subtle pull away from it. Her feet changed direction half a second earlier than her mind made the decision. She kept choosing wider paths, busier routes. She kept leaving a cushion of distance between herself and the ranger station without meaning to. When she and Bethany finally headed back toward the parking lot, they approached from the opposite side of the park, a route that required passing the ranger station one last time. Mia tried to prepare herself for what she might see. The station looked almost normal now. The porch sat in full sun. The windows were reflective, showing trees and sky instead of whatever glow had been inside. The door was shut. No handwritten signs were visible from a distance. That should have eased her. Instead, it made her feel worse, because the absence of those signs didn't feel like cleanup. It felt like reset, like a display being changed out between audiences. They walked past without stopping. Mia kept her posture loose, her face neutral. She didn't glance directly at the windows. She didn't want to advertise that she had noticed anything earlier. She let Bethany's presence set the pace. Half a block past the station, Mia's phone buzzed again. Not a message this time. A notification from a neighborhood safety alert feed she followed, the kind that posted lost pets and car break-ins, and the occasional police activity report. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the subject line, and her thumb froze. A report of an adult missing from Riverside Commons, last seen near the eastern entrance. No name, no photo yet, only a short description and a time window. Late afternoon, when the park had been packed. Mia's stomach tightened in a familiar way. She walked another 10 steps, then slowed. Bethany kept going, then noticed and slowed too, drifting back within arm's reach. Mia didn't show her the phone. She didn't explain. The idea of speaking about it made the thing more real than she could tolerate in that moment. Mia turned her head slightly, just enough to see the ranger station over her shoulder, without fully turning around. The station door was open again, only a few inches, and inside the bluish glow had returned, thin but present, a narrow band of light leaking onto the porch boards as if something had been angled toward the doorway on purpose. Mia stopped walking. Bethany's momentum carried her 2 steps ahead. Then she stopped as well, turning her head back toward Mia with a subtle question in her posture. Mia lifted her phone, not to call, but to take a picture. She needed something tangible, something she could show later without having to trust her own memory. She held the screen steady and zoomed in toward the station doorway. The camera struggled for focus, catching porch rail, door frame, shadow. Then it sharpened, and for a fraction of a second the screen displayed the interior, clearly enough that Mia felt her throat close. A folding chair sat inside the station, positioned facing the door. Above it, on a tripod, was a camera, black, compact, pointed outward toward the porch. Behind the tripod was a second glow source, a monitor on a table showing a bright, washed-out image that looked like a live feed. As Mia stared, the monitor image shifted. The grainy view on the screen moved slightly, as if the camera had adjusted, as if it had detected motion. Mia's phone abruptly dimmed. The display went dark for half a beat, then flashed back to life with a low battery warning that made no sense. Her phone had been charged. Her hands tightened hard enough to ache. She tapped the screen again, and the warning vanished. The camera app remained open. The image of the station doorway returned, but now the door had opened wider, not from wind, not from a drifting hinge. The movement was controlled, measured, incremental, as if someone inside had pulled it to a specific angle and stopped. Mia lowered her phone and started walking again immediately, pulling her body forward as if movement itself could keep her from being selected. She didn't run. She didn't want to look panicked. She just walked fast, forcing her stride to remain steady. Bethany matched her pace without being pulled. Mia didn't grab her. She didn't need to. Bethany moved with the instinct of a person who sensed a change without seeing its cause. They didn't stop until they reached a busier section of path near the central lawn, where a cluster of people gathered around a small musician setup. Only there did Mia finally turn her head again. From that distance, the ranger station looked like a simple building again. The door appeared shut. Maybe it was. Maybe her angle was wrong. The windows reflected sky. If someone asked her what she had seen, she knew how easily it could dissolve under the weight of ordinary explanations. Mia and Bethany left the park soon after. They walked in the open, near the main paths. They stayed around groups. They reached the parking lot and drove away separately. That night, Mia couldn't let it go. She opened her neighborhood safety feed again. More details had appeared in the missing person report. An adult, last seen near the eastern entrance, believed to have been approached by someone presenting as park staff. The post included a note that the person had been directed toward the ranger station for assistance. Mia stared at that line until her eyes stung. She searched for older reports. She found a handful, scattered over the last year, each mentioning Riverside Commons and the eastern entrance. Most were vague. A few included phrases like park employee, help desk, maps, and direction. One post described a bluish light in the ranger station after hours. Another described a handwritten sign on a day when the park was crowded. None of the posts ended with a clear outcome. Mia tried to sleep. She failed. The dark kept rearranging the day's images into sharper shapes. The lanyard badge swinging, blank and convincing. The door opening exactly a few inches. The monitor inside showing a view that looked too much like the porch, like the world she stood in. By mid-morning the next day, she had driven back to Riverside Commons alone. She told herself she would only walk the main lawn. She told herself she would keep it simple. But her car pulled into the eastern parking area anyway, as if her body had decided that avoiding the place wasn't the same as understanding it. The ranger station looked different in daylight. A temporary metal barrier had been set up along the porch line, the kind used for construction. Yellow caution tape crossed the steps, looped around the railing. A printed city notice had been taped to the doorframe, crisp and official, announcing temporary closure of the building due to facility inspection. 2 uniformed officers stood near the path, not actively stopping people from walking by, but placed in a way that made the building feel watched. Mia parked and stayed in her car, observing from a distance. She didn't want to insert herself into whatever had begun. She just needed to know she hadn't imagined the shift from normal to wrong. A white utility van with a city logo sat nearby. A person in gloves carried equipment into the station, cases that looked like cameras, evidence kits, or inspection gear. Another person moved around the side of the building and disappeared behind it, as if checking access points Mia had never noticed. Mia watched the officers more than the station. Their posture wasn't casual. They weren't chatting with passers-by. They kept scanning, keeping their focus outward, as if the building was less important than whoever might be nearby because of it. A small knot of people gathered at the edge of the caution tape, trying to see. Mia recognized the curious behavior from every public incident she'd ever witnessed. Humans drawn to closed doors. She stayed away from that group. After 15 minutes, a third police vehicle arrived. Unmarked, dark. A person in plain clothes stepped out and spoke briefly with the uniformed officers. The gesture was short, controlled, no spectacle, but the presence felt heavy. Mia's phone buzzed again. A new alert. The missing adult had been located. No details, only that they were safe and in contact with family, and that the park building was undergoing inspection. Safe didn't mean fine. Safe didn't mean untouched. Safe didn't mean nothing had happened. Mia stared at the ranger station through her windshield. The caution tape fluttered lightly in the breeze. The building looked small and harmless, almost pathetic in the daylight. Then she saw movement near the tree line behind the station, just a brief shape crossing between trunks. A person in a neutral cap and oversized jacket, walking at a measured pace along the boundary where the park met a service road. From this angle, the person's face stayed hidden, but the posture was unmistakable, controlled, unhurried, as if their schedule hadn't been interrupted so much as adjusted. The person didn't move toward the building. They moved away. Mia's breath caught. She tried to lift her phone again, but her hands hesitated, and by the time she steadied the camera, the figure had slipped behind a maintenance shed and vanished. A minute later, one of the officers turned their head sharply in that direction, as if they had seen something too. The officer stepped away from the ranger station, walking toward the service road with a hand near their belt. Another officer followed. Their pace increased. Mia didn't see what happened beyond the trees. She only saw the shift in behavior. People who had been focused on a building, now moving with purpose toward a boundary. She saw the plainclothes person stride after them. Fast, posture tightened. The way people moved when the abstract became immediate. Mia sat perfectly still in her car, eyes locked on the tree line. A few minutes later, the officers returned, slower. One held something folded in a clear bag, fabric, dark, maybe a jacket. Another carried a plastic badge holder on a lanyard, the kind Mia had seen swinging on the person's neck the day before. The badge holder looked empty, just a clear rectangle designed to display authority. They didn't look triumphant. They looked like people who had found one piece of a mechanism and knew the rest might still be turning somewhere else. Mia didn't stay much longer. She drove away from Riverside Commons with her shoulders tight and her jaw clenched. She didn't feel relief. The park was still there, open and green. People still arrived with coolers and strollers. Sunlight still hit the pond and made it sparkle. Normal life still ran along the paths as if nothing had happened. But now Mia knew something else too. The ranger station had never been only a relic. It had been a tool, quiet, plausible, built to blend into a place where no one wanted to believe anything bad could happen in plain sight.